We are back at my garage, and yesterday it was not good news. Since I bought this Audi Rs3, it's been nothing but downhill. It quickly turned into the biggest challenge I've had so far rebuilding crash damaged cars. The bent chassis leg now seems like a minor hiccup compared to what I have to do to put this car back on the road. After finding out we have a problem with the rough working of the engine, we went through a series of attempts to resolve it. We changed spark plugs, swapped ignition coils, we even looked inside the cylinder, and then we did a compression test, and it confirmed the worst it could possibly be: a mechanical damage in cylinder 1. Today we're going to disassemble everything we possibly can without a ramp. We're going to remove the damaged slam panel, try to cause a fire, remove pretty much anything connected to the engine, and finally we're going to expose how much the chassis leg is actually bent. Yesterday we managed to remove all of the aircon gas from the system, and now it's time to remove all of the fluids, the oil, the coolant, and basically start stripping the entire front end. We start off by draining the engine oil, which almost gave me a heart attack. When I removed the drain plug, there was no oil coming out, but then I told my cameraman to open the oil cap on the top so the system could breathe. And out goes 7.5 quarts of oil. The next step was draining the coolant. This time Chris knew the drill. The Rs3 has a really strange way of draining the coolant. You have to remove a metal pipe, which you can guess how stuck it was to the rubber hoses. It almost seemed like it was welded. Next up was the auxiliary radiator, which also connects to metal tubes, but after some persuasion it was out. I was wondering why this whole auxiliary cooling radiator will not move when I've removed the two main fixing points, 1, 2 here, and then guess what? That here is actually a bolt. I don't know if you can see, but there is a nut on the back side, so I need to figure out now how can I remove it, because there's no head on this one. I mean, it's like a stud type of thing. So I've just managed to remove the two cooling hoses, and the next thing is removing this whole unit. So we have damage here and damage on the inner side. I don't know if you can see. I ended up applying lateral pressure to the threaded stud so the friction could stop its rotation. Thankfully it wasn't too stuck and I managed to get it out. One auxiliary cooling radiator is out, but check this out. This was actually dented during the damage, so we're gonna replace the whole set here. We're not gonna use this one anymore. It's no good. After that, I started disassembling the airway in the middle, followed by the bonnet hook and the two latches on each side. There was a small water hose that I had missed, so I took that off too. Eventually, I managed to remove both latches along with the pulling cord that goes all the way to the interior. Once that was off, there was a few remaining hoses at the bottom, which I removed, and I could finally see the slam panel starting to move. Finally, it was time for the main bolts which hold the entire assembly. I didn't really know where these banks came from, when in reality it was just a pull-out job. This probably looks like not a big deal on camera, but this thing was heavy. And just like that, the whole front mask was off. Well, I've just taken out the entire rat pack off. Now the next step is getting rid of some parts. We're gonna swap over the radiator to the new slam panel, basically, which is made of plastic, by the way, in comparison to the GOC. We have a ton of work left to do. Look at that mess. And now we can actually see how much of a dent on that one. And what's worrying is that there is a mark that probably this has hit the alternator. It's good that it works. So the next step is basically removing this and separating the crash bar from the slam panel. Probably transfer this onto the new slam panel, and then obviously all the radiators underneath. But yeah, let's crack on. The front crash bar was so bent it was actually hanging around the radiator pack, so it was a bit wobbly to get it out. I decided to undo the bonnet hook and remove the intercooler first so I don't damage it. I've managed to remove the intercooler and the little crash bar. I just want to show you how bent is that. So you can see here, and on this side you can see the distance here, and it's kind of like twisted to the one side. I hope only one chassis leg is bent. So the way to remove this radiator pack is, I think we have to push these two clips simultaneously on one side and here on the other side, and I think that should sort of make it pop off, but let's see. Well, after struggling for a while and a broken clip later, the radiators finally left the broken nest. Thankfully, they were all okay. And here we go, one broken slam panel going to the bin. And here it is, one brand new second-hand slam panel, which, by the way, costs absolutely a fortune. 827 euros and 10 cents for that. I gotta admit, I thought it was second-hand one, but when it arrived it was actually brand new. I like to put all screws back into place so I don't lose them. The next step is putting the radiator pack back inside, and I'm gonna store this assembly on the side until it's time to, well, basically go ahead with it. In goes the radiator pack into the new slam panel. Of course, not without a little bit of a mess. The next thing to go is the intercooler. There are 4 screws for the intercooler, but it did put up a fight initially, as the holes were brand new. Also, don't forget to put the little rubbery protectors on there as well. Next on was the bonnet latches. The left one was pretty straightforward. The right one, however, not so much. The cable was not sitting correctly, almost as if it was longer than it should be. And no surprise, the actual rubber sleeve had come out of the pocket lid during the accident. So with a little bit of persuasion, it was back into place. The final thing for today would be taking out the airbox, so I can make some more space here and prep the area for engine out. The air filter box is dead easy to remove. You just pull up with some force. I then continued with removing more intercooler pipes, but since this one didn't want to come off from the throttle bodies, I had to trick it a little bit, so I did the other side first. And this is when I turned into a complete Wookiee. I forgot to disconnect the battery and then accidentally touched a positively charged surface. You act as a ground and it creates fireworks and something opposite of worlds. First thing was to create some space, so I got rid of this AC pipe. I spent the next hour disconnecting clips and fasteners one by one. I got to the first harness intersection and had to move to the wires on the top of the engine. There were quite a few of them around the ignition course, but soon enough the whole bracket was break loose. The inlet pipe was in the way, so off it goes. There was another ton of attachments to undo around the side of the engine. Next up was the upper part of the intake manifold. You will see why in a minute. So, out go the 5 bolts on top. And then it pretty much took me a decade to figure out how to remove it. So the key here was to slide up and forward towards the cabin. One intake manifold upper part is out. The reason why I took this off is because this harness, so the harness runs all the way in between the throttle body and in between the actual intake, so I just needed space to take this off and that one, and then just sort of take it all off. Let's continue. The harness was now free to move. The next step was to block the inlets. Not my best idea, but it would do the job. I then had to cut off the factory cable ties and detach the bracket from the harness, so I could squeeze it in between the engine and this metal coolant pipe, which was a nightmare to take off. Last thing remaining was to remove the gearbox connector. And just like that, a whole weekend of harness detachment had gone by. the mess continues. I've just removed this piping from the up of the gearbox connecting to the auxiliary radiator, and as you can see, it made a mess. It was now time for the gear lever. Easier than I thought. So for those of you who are actually wondering how to disconnect the gear lever, it's very simple. It's a ball joint there. You just take a trim tool. I use this one. It's very useful, and you just pry this out. And then here, which is sort of a further inboard, there are two little sort of a clips that you need to push inboard, and then that will pop off. So personally, I thought this is something very complicated to do, but no, it's very simple. The next task was taking off the coolant tank on top. There were a few hoses remaining to be disconnected. I did put a nylon back on top of the alternator to protect it, as coolant was dripping from everywhere. The coolant tank is out, and now we continue with dismantling possibly the fuel lines, but let's see how it goes. Fuel lines were surprisingly easy, just a few quick release joints and they were out too. I put some masking tape and stretch foil on top so no debris could go inside them. So the next thing to remove is actually these two aircon lines. As you can see, if we follow them around, they disconnect there, and in order to work on this area we need to basically remove that whole joint there, the plastic clip, along with this big air compressor line which is already disconnected. So let's crack on to remove this piece next. Removing those AC lines was quite fiddly, but once you manage to pry out the joints at the back, they come off easily. The process is pretty much the same for both tubes. I think there is just a few more sort of cooling lines to disconnect. I think it's that one there. Once this is off, and it's a nightmare because it's sort of a rubber hose to a metal, and this is an absolute nightmare to remove. So once we remove that, there is just one last one, which is probably a hot and cold connection for the heating in the car. So once we've removed it from here, this one is sort of connected to a plastic hose, so shouldn't be that hard. But once this is out, we are good to go. We just need to disconnect the, well, three major things basically. First one is the exhaust. The second one is the prop shaft, which goes all the way to the rear differential. The two front drive shafts, and that's it. We are good to take it out. Disconnecting coolant pipes which go into a metal tube is absolute nightmare. So make sure you have enough WD-40 and a bent owl, otherwise you're going to struggle. The next step is taking the alternator off. When we take out the engine, I feel like we're gonna struggle, so I'm gonna take it off now, see where we stand. Probably the AC compressor as well, but we'll see. Step 1. Auxiliary drive belt. Auxiliary belt is out, and now the next step is taking the alternator off, which is these bolts here, and then the AC compressor as well. Alternator and AC compressor are a straightforward job. A few bolts to undo and they are out. You should start with the AC compressor at the bottom, because you can't really take the alternator out if you still have the AC hoses attached to it. And finally is the belt tensioner. And a pulley. And now we can clearly see the damage on the chassis leg. The good thing is this can now go to the body shop to be straightened. So this is pretty much where we managed to get today. There are three main things left to be done: the main prop shaft, which goes to the rear differential, the exhaust, and the two drive shafts at the front, and then it's an engine out time. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, make sure you hit that thumbs up button. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.